DFS. It is Friday, December 16th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 15 DFS podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Smola. And I didn't say DraftKings or FanDuel there like I usually do in the intro because we're going to do things a little bit differently this week. Still talking DraftKings and FanDuel, just like usual, but we're going to mash those two together in this show. Going to cover both sites. Going to talk about all the, the same number of guys by position like we usually do, Jared, but switching it up a little bit because after this, streaming at 12:30 on the same YouTube channel, we're going to do some DFS drafting like we've been talking about here and there in recent shows.
Yeah, I've become pretty obsessed with these daily drafts. They're fun. It's a lot of the same strategy as DFS, but in kind of a different way because you're drafting these teams instead of having to fit into a salary cap. So you can get, we'll talk about it. You can get, different, you can get different exposures to different players, better prices on these different sites. So it's fun.
And for me, drafting is easily the most fun part of fantasy football. So I like the format that reintroduces that rather than me just sitting there building 100 lineups and then deciding which one to play and ultimately playing one that, like, leaving one on the bench that had that one guy that I needed to make the money.
Yep.
So for now, we will move on, though, to talking about DraftKings and FanDuel. Go position by position like usual. Jared will start at cash quarterback. I feel like 5K Mac Jones could work on DraftKings, but I don't think I can get to him this week. 33rd in points per game among quarterbacks, one game all year with more than one TD pass. What about you?
I know I was ready to buy back in on Mac after that Vikings game. I think the past 2 weeks against Buffalo and Arizona, he just hasn't played well, and he's probably going to be without Jacoby Myers and Devontae Parker on Sunday. He's interesting. Maybe in a tournament, you take a shot on him. Yeah, for me this week, and really on both sides, I'm just focused on two quarterbacks. It's Justin Herbert and Dak Prescott, both for cash and tourneys. Herbert, first time all season last week, had Mike Williams and Keenan Allen healthy for an entire game, put up 22.5 DraftKings points, despite scoring just one touchdown in that game. Herbert has had absurd passing volume all season. He's averaging 43 attempts per game. I would bet on him topping that mark on Sunday against the Titans, who are, the number one team in pass rate over expected against. Teams go pass heavy against Tennessee. You definitely don't have to, convince the Chargers to do that. So, and then Tennessee 30th in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA over the past 5 weeks. They're allowing 308 passing yards and 2 touchdowns per game over that span.
Yeah, Justin Herbert's going to be my cash guy on FanDuel at 8,300. He sits second in our FanDuel dollars per point projections there. The only guy ahead of him is Jalen Hurts, who's another $700 more expensive. So not a big deal to get to Herbert's salary there. He has one game of 20 plus FanDuel points among his past 9, which I think is, the one thing that maybe concerns you if you look at him. Does he have the Justin Herbert ceiling? He is, however, scoring 3.9 points per game under expected over that span, according to Pro Football Focus numbers. Yeah. He's topped 330 yards each of the past 2 weeks, just one touchdown in each of those games, 47 plus attempts in 3 straight. You already mentioned this matchup should only further motivate passing volume, and he's been efficient, over 74% completions in 3 of the past 4 games. I think the touchdowns are going to come back, especially now that Mike Williams is back in the mix. So he's my cash guy on FanDuel. For DraftKings, though, I'm going to pay down, and I'm going to go to Tom Brady most likely instead of Dak Prescott. The two of them have both been much more floor plays than ceiling lately, and the floor hasn't really been especially lower with either one. We've got a real bad game from Tom Brady last week to look at, but before that, he and Dak Prescott basically the same on floor. Dak's got 3 straight games of under 20 points. Tom Brady in that same range. And the Bengals are quietly a positive quarterback matchup here. 20 points allowed to Deshaun Watson last week, 24 to Jacoby Brissett back in week 8 in that game where they lost Chidobe Awuzie, the cornerback we've mentioned, that the Bengals lost for the season in that game. Since then, though, not just Watson and Brissett, but 2 touchdown passes to Baker Mayfield in mop-up duty, 18.7 fantasy points to Kenny Pickett, 291 yards to Ryan Tannehill. So you can see plenty of examples of quarterbacks who aren't anything special throwing the ball elevating their production in this Bengals matchup. I think there'll be lots of passing volume for Tom Brady here, as usual. The Bucs like to do that anyway, but they head into this game as home underdogs against a team that I think is legitimately better. And I think the Bengals defense even gets a little bit softer because their lead pass rusher, Trey Hendrickson, is likely out for this game.
Yeah, I can get on board with Brady as a cash play. I think he's a pretty safe bet to give you, 17 to 20 DraftKings points, which is more than enough at $5,500. I do. I'm gonna get up to Justin Herbert in cash on DraftKings, but Dak Prescott would be my second choice, and he's been underwhelming over the last 5 games now, averaging just 18.4 DK points per game over that span. No games over 21.2 DK points, but it's really just been a volume thing for Dak. He has 30 or fewer pass attempts in 3 of those last 5 games. He's playing pretty well, 67% completion rate, 7.4 yards per attempt over that span. I'm just betting on more passing volume this weekend in this game against Jacksonville, who is 31st in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA over the last 5 weeks. They're 7th on the season in pass rate over expected against. So we've seen teams, lean pass against them. Tyron Smith is also expected to make his season debut on Sunday, which is, going to help Prescott's protection.
And especially good timing because they just lost right tackle Terrence Steele to an ACL tear in last week's game. I think, you said Tom Brady is a cash play. I agree. You might look at him and still think ceiling potential here and maybe a tournament play. We haven't seen that ceiling potential from Tom Brady this year, though. So I'm not chasing him on the tournament side. I would have been interested in Mike White against the Lions, but we found out shortly before this that there is not going to be any Mike White this week. He's not going to be cleared from his internal injuries. He said the other day he's dealing with general soreness and that he was no doubt going to play, but doctors are like, oh, there's actually some doubt here, Mike. You're going to have to protect those ribs that nobody was protecting in Buffalo the other day. So I'm more likely pushing into the 6K range or above. Certainly Justin Herbert's in play here. Joe Burrow, 7K is in play against the Bucs, but I do think Dak Prescott, Trevor Lawrence are interesting for this one for, like you said, if we get more passing volume from the Cowboys than we have in this matchup, we could get Dak Prescott at a lower ownership rate than we might get if he came into this game throwing more often.
Yeah, for sure. Again, for me, it's Herbert and Dak for me in tournaments. If I was going to look elsewhere, Jalen Hurts always in play, 8,200 against a bad Bears defense. He could have a big game passing or running on Sunday. And then again, I think Mac Jones would sort of be my fourth guy because the price, $5,000. He gets the Raiders matchup. All of his receivers are cheap, which we'll talk about some of them in the wide receiver section here. Plus, Mac Jones gives you a reason to play either Josh Jacobs or Devontae Adams. And throughout the season, like one of those guys has been on tournament winning teams almost every week. Like one of them was for 30 plus points almost every single week. So it's an easy run back on your Mac Jones stacks.
I don't want to lose sight of Trevor Lawrence in that same game as Dak Prescott. Obviously, we look at the matchup and we think Dallas's pass defense is really tough and we're, avoiding playing Trevor Lawrence there. But it has shown some soft spots in recent weeks. It's kind of been going back and forth between bad and good, not very good overall on defense last week against Houston, terrible against Green Bay a few weeks ago. So, there's at least room for there to be a down game from Dallas here. We also saw Trevor Lawrence beat up a pretty good Baltimore defense a few weeks ago. So, it's one of those where maybe he does have a rough game, but maybe he doesn't. And they've already shown more of that willingness to throw the ball lately. So I think that there is plenty of upside along with downside risk to Trevor Lawrence in this one, plus a lot lower ownership, more likely than Dak and other guys.
Yeah, I was going to say just 5% projected ownership, despite Lawrence, being the tournament winner last week.
Mm-hmm. On FanDuel, it's going to be Justin Herbert. Joe Burrow, for me, is the other top option. Herbert's ownership projection is actually lower on FanDuel than it is on DraftKings, especially relative to the other guys at the position. But then Joe Burrow, I think, has a chance to just kind of get lost in there that close to Justin Herbert and some other guys. He's fourth in our FanDuel dollars per point projections, 2+ touchdown passes in 3 of his past 4 games. So relative safety. He's also got 2 games over 28 FanDuel points in that span. So we've seen the ceiling from him as well. Bengals are less than 1 point behind the Chargers in implied team total for this week. Mm-hmm. So I think plenty of upside to both quarterbacks.
Yeah, my issue with Burrow is just the injuries to T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd. And then it does look like Tampa's going to get some pieces back in the secondary this week. Antoine Winfield has a chance to come back. It looks like Mike Edwards should be back. Sean Murphy-Bunting should be back. So maybe a bit tougher matchup than it has been the past few weeks with those guys out.
I think Sean Murphy-Bunting returning is actually good for opposing quarterbacks.
Might be.
Anything else at quarterback?
No.
Running back, Jared, for cash, Zonovan Knight and Latavius Murray sit among the top 4 in our DK dollars per point. Are you biting on either of those guys this week?
Zonovan Knight on DraftKings, I'm going to play. I'm not sure about FanDuel. I'm just going to stay away from Latavius Murray. If he gets the workload he has been getting, he's a fine play. I just think there's at least some chance that, that Marlon Mack starts getting, 35, 40% of the work. And if that's the case, like, there's no reason to like Latavius Murray. Zonovan Knight, I do like. We updated projections with the change from Mike White to Zach Wilson, shaved Knight's efficiency a little bit, just thinking the Jets offense won't do as well with Zach Wilson, but his volume projection actually climbed for us because the Jets were 69% pass with either Mike White or Joe Flacco under center, 52% pass in games with Zach Wilson. So I just think they're going to run the ball more with Wilson under center if, Wilson's previous 7 games this season are any indication.
I agree. I think Zonovan Knight gains a little bit of steam here. Latavius Murray, I saw that high and I was like, okay, let's look down and see who else is in the 5K range. I would prefer either Rachaad White or Leonard Fournette, 5,400, 5,500 in my Brady cash lineup. And that's because I like either of them more for receiving upside than I do rushing. So I'd be willing to play either one alongside Tom Brady. Mostly I'm getting the salary savings. I don't need enormous numbers from either guy for it to pay off.
For sure.
I also like Isaiah Pacheco at 5,900 more than Latavius Murray. About the same, I would say, as Zonovan Knight. It's close there. Detroit has not been as favorable a matchup lately against the run as earlier this year. But it's also one of those, like you said, with the pass defense last week heading into that matchup with the Vikings, not something to adjust matchups for, but at least something to be aware of. Of course, the knock on the Jets versus the Chiefs is that it's the Jets versus the Chiefs. I mean, obviously Pacheco's in a great spot for scoring opportunities. And most importantly, 16 carries and 78.8 rushing yards per game over the past 5. So he's getting good volume. Would love to see him get more opportunities near the goal line, but I'll at least take my chances on his workload and just hope that he gets that.
Yeah. He does have 10 carries inside the 10 over the last 5 weeks. And he's getting his TD chances, and he will in this matchup against Houston. We've made it way too long in the running back session without talking about James Conner, though, who for me is the first guy in my cash lineup on both sides. 6,900 on DraftKings, 7,200 on FanDuel. Conner right now has a top 5, maybe a top 3 role among running backs, 18.8 carries and 4.5 targets per game over his last 4, 5th in expected fantasy points over that span, 3rd in actual fantasy points over that span. A middling matchup against Denver this week. They're 17th in Football Outsiders run defense, DVOA. Going to be an ugly game. So I'm debating whether I want to play Conner in tournaments because I don't know if he has the ultimate upside we need. But I think for cash, he's a lock at these prices.
Yeah, I could go either way on him in tournaments, but I think it's pretty easy here. 15 carries, 7 targets against New England on Monday night. He's averaging 23.3 opportunities over his past 4 games. So certainly ignoring ownership projection here and just going ahead and playing him in cash. Derrick Henry sits right behind James Conner, who leads our FanDuel dollars per point at running back this week. Number 2 is Derrick Henry, despite his salary. I don't mind playing him for cash on FanDuel. We'll see exactly how it fits with everything else, especially I don't mind playing him and Justin Herbert in the same cash lineup on FanDuel if the salary works out at the other positions.
Yeah, I like him I like Henry in a vacuum. He is pretty tough to fit in. There's, not, again, it's kind of similar to last week, not a ton of cheap plays on FanDuel to like. I like David Montgomery on FanDuel at $6,800. Kind of the same argument as James Conner, like not a great matchup, obviously not a great offense, but just volume wise, Montgomery 15 carries and 4.3 targets over the last 3 games without Khalil Herbert out for this game Sunday against the Eagles. So Montgomery, just a good volume bet for the price on FanDuel.
Yeah, I certainly agree with a good volume bet. I think he's a better bet to get those touches than Travis Etienne at a similar salary. Najee Harris is similar, hasn't been getting a whole lot of receiving. So I think he's in that decision process as well.
Yeah, Etienne's actually my 3rd guy right now on DraftKings for cash. Tell me how much you hate it.
I mean, we've been talking about ETN behind the scenes for the past couple of weeks. He's just not getting the receiving work. The team's not throwing him the ball, and this has been not a great matchup for rushing lately. So I don't trust ETN to get the touches here. He's not a pounder near the goal line if they do get it down there. Plus, it's a negative matchup just overall against the Dallas defense. Talked about how Trevor Lawrence could have a good day, but they also could just get shut down and not score a lot in this game. So honestly, I don't like Travis Etienne for cash at all.
Yeah, so for me on DraftKings, $6,000 for Etienne. It's his lowest price since week 8. He's played 75+% of the Jags offensive snaps in 6 straight healthy games now. So to me, it's mostly that. Like you're getting pretty much a feature back at $6,000. No targets for Etienne last week. He had seen at least 2 in 7 straight healthy games prior to last week, averaging 3.3 over that span. So not a big role in the passing game, but I also don't think he's a 0 in the passing game. Like you said,
that's
matchup
like less than Derrick Henry.
It's probably similar, right? Yeah. I mean, if you can give me 2 catches, I'm okay with it. It's just getting that type of snap rate out of a $6,000, and I still think Etienne's a good back. Like he can break off a big play anytime he touches the ball. So I'm gonna give him a shot.
Touches haven't been there. Production hasn't been there. I'll take $6,500 Miles Sanders pretty easily facing the Bears. Bears are bad at everything. Obviously, there's the lack of targets for Miles Sanders as well, but I think he has a much better chance of finding the end zone, much better chance of challenging that 100-yard bonus. Bears 31st against the pass, 29th against the run. So, I mean, the Eagles can do whatever they want. We saw last week the Eagles will just do whatever they want. I expect this game to be similar in game flow to last week. I like Miles Sanders on the tournament side as well. Obviously, it's a little bit easier to bet on the risk there than it is in a cash lineup, but I don't think that the risk is that high. What else do you like for tournament running backs?
Yeah, I'm with you on Sanders. Projected for just 11% ownership. He's topped 30 DraftKings points in each of his last 2 good matchups against the Packers and Giants. And he has another good matchup on Sunday against the Bears, who are 25th in adjusted points allowed to running backs. I am so mad that Alvin Kamara is going to be like semi-popular this week. He was the guy I was like looking to play at I was thinking like 10% ownership. It looks like he's going to be, close to double that. I'm probably still going to play him on DraftKings at $600 to $800. I probably won't get to him on FanDuel. He's supposed to be even more popular on FanDuel. As we talked about in yesterday's preview shot, coming off the bye week, maybe he's re-energized a little bit. Mark Ingram's absence does matter. Kamara's handled a bigger piece of the Saints backfield in games Ingram has missed this season, and he has this good matchup against Atlanta, who isn't good against running backs on the ground or in the passing game. So. I'm gonna give him. I'm gonna play him despite the high ownership, just because he's been my guy since the start of the week.
Yeah, I mean, I like the popularity because I think that he's an okay fade. It's certainly okay to play him. There's plenty of upside. We don't need his absolute ceiling to make him pay off, even if a quarter of the tournament field has him in lineups. I just don't think that the same old Alvin Kamara ceiling is there. We have had 2 big games from him this year. He had 194 total yards against Seattle way back in week 5, no touchdowns in that game. He had another game where he had 3 touchdowns against the Raiders, averaged 3.4 yards per carry in that one. So, I mean, I'm cherry picking the stats that don't line up, but I think it's really an example of him just not having that ultimate, you have to have Alvin Kamara this week or you're not going to win a tournament ceiling. I don't think that this Saints offense has that. He could absolutely hit, 25, 28 points and help you regardless of how many teams have him, though.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think, 25, 28 is kind of what you're looking for if you're playing Alvin Kamara. He's down to $6,800 too, which is one of his lowest prices of the season.
I like the popularity because it'll bring down some other guys in that range. We talked about James Conner, make him a little bit more interesting. I also think that Tony Pollard looks like he's getting overlooked this week on both sites. So 7,100 for Pollard on DraftKings. You look at that and you're like, well, Tony Pollard's getting a little bit too expensive now for what he is. But what he is 7th among running backs in total PPR points for the season. He's been over 21 PPR points in 5 of the past 6 games. His other game in that span included 18 carries and 2 targets. So it's not like he disappeared. He just didn't find the end zone. Only Josh Jacobs has more PPR points among running backs over the past 5 weeks than Tony Pollard. No running back has more touchdowns. He is $1,000 less in DK salary than Josh Jacobs, $900 less than Derrick Henry, 7% ownership projection on DK versus 20% for Jacobs and Henry.
Yeah.
So like he should be getting considered in that territory based on how everybody's been producing lately, and he's not. And it's even lower on FanDuel, 4% projected ownership for Pollard there, $8,200. So, I mean, it's a little bit tougher to fit Tony Pollard on FanDuel this week, but he's arguably a better play straight up than Joe Mixon, who's only $100 cheaper. He's also $500 cheaper than Austin Eckler. And I don't know how different an option Tony Pollard is than Eckler, who has a worse matchup this week. Pollard, of course, catches passes. So even if they struggle to run the ball a little bit more than usual, he's the better receiving back. Yeah. So I think that Tony Pollard looks just good in general this week. And I think that he's going to get played a lot less than what he should.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I'm definitely not an ownership expert, but I would be surprised if Pollard comes in less than half his own as like James Conner and Alvin Kamara when they're priced pretty similar on DraftKings. If that's going to be the case, if we're still sitting here Sunday and those are the projections, I'm going to force myself to get off Alvin Kamara and play Tony Pollard at half the ownership.
Yeah. One other build that I was wondering if it made sense was Justin Herbert plus a wide receiver plus Derrick Henry in the same tournament lineup. And, obviously the first challenge is fitting that salary wise, but then I was thinking, I'm not sure if that actually makes sense because to get the ceiling games from either Justin Herbert or Derrick Henry, we need one of those two offenses to just be beating up the other team. We need Justin Herbert to be going nuts and likely getting ahead of the Titans in that scenario, which would hurt Derrick Henry's workload. Or we need Derrick Henry going nuts, which means the Titans holding the ball a lot, running out the clock, and not getting as many opportunities for Justin Herbert. So I think it's one of those where if you think about it a little bit, you can make sense of it. Oh, Derrick Henry, big game. Justin Herbert needs to chase. I think ultimately, though, those two are at odds if they're going to reach their tournament ceilings.
Well, I think the scenario you need, and it works with someone like Henry who can break off long runs. Like you need Henry to break off some long runs early on, a long touchdown run, get the Titans out to a lead without, controlling the ball for, 2/3 of the first quarter. I mean, it's that, you're kind of threading the needle a little bit with it. But I'm going to play at least one Henry Herbert team. I think, I think Chico Conquo is back in play as a run back on a Herbert team if you want to go that direction too.
See that. Anything else at running back?
No.
Wide receiver for cash, Jared. It was going to be 6K Garrett Wilson getting talked about, but not with Zach Wilson around, right?
Well, yeah, on DraftKings, Garrett Wilson and Elijah Moore were our top two values at wide receiver prior to the Mike White news. Now, I'm not going to play Garrett Wilson for 6K in cash with Zach Wilson. I still might play Elijah Moore for 3,600 with Zach Wilson. It's just the price, a talent I still believe in. Matchup is awesome. The Lions are the worst defense in terms of adjusted points allowed to slot receivers. And that's where Elijah Moore has been playing since the bye week. So he's easier to stomach despite the quarterback downgrade because of the price tag.
And Corey Davis is out for this game, so that is what puts Elijah Moore into consideration. Certainly worth noting that we had 182.7 passing yards per game with Zach Wilson versus 317.3 with Mike White. You mentioned the pass run splits with and without Zach Wilson. So obviously it's a risky spot. But yeah, when we're talking about 3K wide receivers, I think that Elijah Moore can still make sense in spite of the quarterback if you need that. And obviously that's what you're going for primarily. Getting a 3K wide receiver allows you to do quite a bit more elsewhere.
For sure.
So outside of that range, 6,700 Chris Godwin with Tom Brady especially looks pretty good. 8th among wide receivers in expected PPR points per game in the 3 weeks since Tampa Bay's bye. I think $6,800 Keenan Allen is in play as well. He's actually tied with Justin Jefferson for the lead in expected PPR points per game over that span. I think both he and Mike Williams are in play for cash here on DK.
Yeah, for sure. Again, I'm kind of all in on the Chargers and Cowboys passing games this week. So I like Mike Williams in cash in tournaments as well. You don't think of Mike Williams as a cash play, and I get it. Maybe you'd rather just go feel safer with Keenan Allen, but I love this matchup for Mike Williams. Tennessee in general, 32nd in adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, but they especially struggle against outside wide receivers. They're 31st against outside wide receivers. That's where Mike Williams plays. That's not where Keenan Allen plays primarily. And then Tennessee's also 32nd defending deep passes, according to Football Outsiders. And, Mike Williams is this offense's deep guy. So I think it's a big Mike Williams game. And then I think CeeDee Lamb is worth looking at for cash as well. He's our fourth best value at wide receiver on DraftKings at $7,300. He's our best value on FanDuel at $8,100. He hasn't had big games lately outside of the Packers game, but he's been pretty consistent. 18.8 DraftKings points in 4 of his last 6 games now. Jacksonville 27th in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers.
I think looking back to the cheap area to help us fit some of those more expensive players, $3,400 Nelson Aguilar is interesting against the Raiders. 10 targets against the Cardinals on Monday night, 8 targets on Thanksgiving night against the Vikings in that game. Jacoby Myers barely played, really, after hurting his shoulder. Devontae Parker is likely out for this one. We'll see about Jacoby Myers. Ramondre Stevenson is also likely out, which, even if Damian Harris is back, probably alters at least the run game some and might alter where the targets are going, because Ramondre Stevenson has been soaking up a lot of targets recently.
For sure. Yeah. Again, it's a good spot for these Patriots wide receivers. Parker is not going to play. He hasn't practiced yet this week. I don't think Myers is going to play either. He went from limited practice Wednesday to no practice on Thursday. So it looks like he had a setback with that concussion. So I'm assuming he's out. So you have Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne, and then Tyquan Thornton. I don't know if I'm going to get to any of those guys in cash. I feel just better about Elijah Moore's spot in the offense. And exactly. I just don't know how the targets are going to be divvied between those Patriots wideouts. That's the only thing.
Yeah, but we don't know how the targets are going to get divvied in the Jets offense either. And Elijah Moore certainly hasn't given us reason to believe they're going his way.
Yeah, I feel pretty good that Moore will be at least the second most targeted player on the Jets on Sunday.
Yeah, but they're going to throw 8 passes.
Yeah, maybe. I think Aguilar is an option in cash for sure if you don't want to go the Elijah Moore route. Tyquan Thornton's the guy I'm going to play in tournaments. He's minimum priced $3,000, projected for 1% ownership right now. We'll see if that climbs if Myers gets ruled out. But Tyquan Thornton, even last week, 97% of the pass routes. He was tied with, I believe it was Aguilar for tops on the team there. Got 5 targets in that game. Thornton was also kind of the Myers replacement in the slot. He ran 54% of his routes from the slot last week, and that's where you want to attack the Raiders. They're the second worst defense defending slot receivers. So, and Thornton, we haven't really seen it yet this year, but theoretically he has the big playability. He ran, I think it was 4.3 something prior to the draft, right? So he has that big playability.
Yeah, and he at least has, I don't want to say 2 big plays for the Patriots this year. I know there was one rushing touchdown that he had for them. So we know that they're at least interested in leveraging his speed. So yeah, he's an interesting guy, especially down at that low salary. The Chargers stacks are certainly going to be popular in tournaments this week. Keenan Allen, though, is sitting single digits in projected ownership on FanDuel. He's got, you can understand why players might favor Mike Williams more heavily versus Keenan Allen on the site that's half PPR. But I think that there's also a tendency to overlook the importance of targets, even if you're not getting full credit for every reception in the scoring. 14 targets in 2 straight games for Keenan Allen. We've talked about this being a pass funnel matchup, so there should be plenty of targets available, even if both of them are getting the ball. We also have seen Keenan Allen score touchdowns in 2 of the past 3 games, and he's had 8 red zone targets over the past 3 games. That included multiple last week, 2 inside the 10-yard line, even with Mike Williams back, 4 targets inside the 10-yard line over the past 3 games. So Keenan Allen's not just the guy who's catching 3-yard passes on the way to Mike Williams touchdowns.
Yeah, lots of ways to make these Herbert stacks. I think you definitely, I think Mike Williams is my favorite among them. You definitely want to mix in Keenan Allen. I think, though, I almost prefer Palmer over Allen just at Palmer's reduced price on these sites. He's $1,500 less on FanDuel. He's over $1,000 less on DraftKings. And Palmer is also, the outside guy. Again, the Titans have actually been a very slightly negative matchup for slot receivers. And not that I'm worried about the matchup for Keenan Allen, but it has been a better spot for outside guys. And, Palmer has been that other outside receiver with Allen in the slot for the most part.
I think Michael Gallup is also very interesting on both sites at $4,500 on DraftKings. And what is the salary? $5,700 on FanDuel. He looks to me like a sneakier and much cheaper version of Mike Williams. 5% ownership on DK projected versus 18% for Mike Williams. $1,800 cheaper is Gallup. He hasn't shown the same ceiling potential as Mike Williams, so I'm not saying that they're even in terms of what we can expect to get from them. But at that different of a salary, we don't need nearly as much from Gallup. We have seen near identical target shares for the two players this year, both right around 18%. We've also had near identical average target depth for them, both of them right about 12 yards in ADOT this year. Strong matchups for both players. The ownership gap's not quite as large between Gallup and Mike Williams on FanDuel, but $1,500 difference in salary there as well. Single digit ownership projection for Gallup right now. So he's interesting this week.
Yep, love Gallup. He'll be on my DAC teams, even might be on some of my Herbert teams as kind of a salary saver. Last tournament wideout I'm looking at, Mike Evans. Lowest price of the season on DraftKings is $6,200. One of his lowest prices on FanDuel, I believe, projected for just 8% ownership, and he's done nothing the past 5 games. He did have a 21-point DraftKings point game 6 games ago. He has a 33-point DraftKings game earlier this year. And man, you watch these Bucs games, and it's like Evans dropping long touchdowns, Evans having long touchdowns called back by penalties. Like he's been there, it just hasn't resulted in actual fantasy points yet. I think there's a chance that it happens this week, and at the price and the ownership, I think he's worth a shot in tournaments.
I agree. Are you playing him in a Tom Brady lineup though, or are you just sticking him in there alone so that you can beat
I don't think I'll get to Brady. If you can fit it, I think a Mike Evans, Jamar Chase mini stack would be an awesome play this week.
Mm-hmm. Tight ends for cash. Tyler Conklin came up first in our DK dollars per point earlier, 3,100. Yep. So you like that. 15 targets for him over the past 2 games. Poor efficiency, but I mean, it changes when you have Zach Wilson back in there. I don't think I'm playing him anymore.
Yeah, Conklin's no longer near the top of the value rankings at tight end. I'm probably going to play Dalton Schultz on both sites. He comes in as our best value on DraftKings. Is he our best value on FanDuel? Second best value after Travis Kelce, which is
Travis Kelce
every week.
He's just auto in that spot.
Yeah, but again, I like the Cowboys passing game. That's going to freaking burn me. Cowboys passing game is going to do nothing, and I'm going to lose everything this week. But again, I like the spot. 25 targets for Dalton Schultz over Dallas's last 4 games. It's a 19% target share, really strong marks for a tight end. And Jacksonville, they're 20th in adjusted points allowed to tight ends. Football Outsiders has them dead last in tight end coverage. So it's definitely a good matchup for Schultz.
I'm trying to go back and see where Dak was in the passing yards market that I posted earlier on Twitter. So he's up there. He's 5th now that Mike White is not playing. 257.5 yards. That's his line in underdog pick'ems right now. So yeah, it should be a decent week for you. He very well might just throw the ball 27 times in that game.
I think we need Trevor Lawrence to have a good Trevor Lawrence game and put points on the board, and I think that'll force Dak to throw it as much as we do.
I do expect this to be a pretty good game. I mean, we got a bad Cowboys game last week against Houston. We got a bad Jaguars game 2 weeks ago in Detroit. So we know that either of these teams is capable of disappointing, but I think that they should be up for this one. I think we should get an interesting game here, which should be good for fantasy.
Please.
I think I'm more likely to play Greg Dulcich, though, on DraftKings at 3,600 against Arizona, the second best tight end scoring matchup by our adjusted fantasy points allowed. He's got 2 straight games of 8 targets. He had 9 targets in the only game that Brett Rippon has started this year. I'm not tying a whole lot to that, but it at least shows that they know each other. And we got 46 pass attempts against the Jets from Brett Rippon in that one. So we know that Broncos coaches are not afraid to have Brett Rippon throw the ball. And even though that's a lot of pass attempts, a 19.6% share for Greg Dulcich in that game. So I like his role in the offense. I like his price most of all. Like if I'm choosing between $3,600 Elijah Moore and $3,600 Greg Dulcich, I'll take Dulcich.
Yeah, and people are off Dulcich, it looks like, after he was chalk last week and kind of underwhelmed. He's projected for 7% ownership this week. I think he's in a better spot, better matchup. I don't know. I think it's maybe a wash at quarterback at this point. As you said, Rippon did target Dulcich in his one start, and no Sutton and no Kendall Hinton this week. So there's even less target competition for Dulcich.
And Arizona has been a pass funneling matchup, second highest pass rate over expected against for the year, according to our guy, Timmy Hernandez, free article on draftsharks.com right now that you can check out. Highest in the league over the past 4 weeks. So it's been a matchup where teams are throwing the ball. So if that works out, then all the more upside to Greg Dulcich. On FanDuel, it's a little bit less clear. We've got these 5K guys, which is probably where I'm going in cash at tight end. but we've got Dulcich at 5,600, Cole Kmet at 53, Gerald Everett 56, Evan Engram 55.
Yeah.
I would really love to say that I have a strong lean toward one of those guys, but I absolutely do not.
Yeah, so we got to talk about Gerald Everett, who I'm interested in tournaments again, largely just because I like this spot for the Chargers passing game. I think you could get 50 attempts out of Herbert. Everett's 4,300 on DraftKings, 5,600 on FanDuel, 6% projected ownership. Gerald Everett does not suck. You said he sucked on last week's podcast. I didn't have numbers in front of me to refute that. He is 10th among 36 qualifying tight ends in PFF receiving grade this season. He's 16th among those 36 in yards per route run. So he's not a stud. He's not elite, but he's fine. And again, I think he has a chance to get 8 targets in this game with the Chargers hopefully throwing as much as I think they're gonna.
If you're 16th in yards per route run at tight end and you play with
Justin
Herbert, then you stink.
I don't think the yards per route run have been high on that team this season in general. It's actually been a pretty inefficient offense so far.
Yeah, I mean, and I certainly don't think that he actually stinks. I do think that he's like an average player at tight end.
He's average. Yep, that's fair.
On the tournament side, of course, we mentioned before, Travis Kelce, as usual, lords over our FanDuel dollars per point despite that $8,000 salary. And as usual, I think it's just up to you to decide whether you're going to play. I mean, the matchup has been run funneling with Houston. Obviously, they're going to throw the ball some, and it's been a worse matchup for wide receivers than tight ends. So I don't think there's any real negative for Travis Kelce this week.
Yeah, no, I always try to get Kelce in tournament lineups, and he hasn't had a big game in a few now, so maybe his ownership will kind of start to dwindle, which would be nice.
It doesn't look like it by the ownership projections right now. We'll see what it looks like by Sunday. He's 11th in our DK dollars per point projections in the lineup generator on draftsharks.com, which I thought was interesting. Mm-hmm. Dallas Goedert, $4,700 on DK this week. Jared, you biting there?
I think he's a better value on FanDuel, right? I had him down as a FanDuel play potentially at 6,000. Yeah, I might take a shot on him. If just people are, it was a shoulder injury for Goddard, so like he should have been able to stay in shape. I guess the risk is like he takes another shot to it and gets knocked out, but like as long as he can avoid that, I think if he plays, I think he's going to be back to his full role.
And I would assume that if they're playing him, they're not worried about that shoulder. You always figure there's some more risk than if a guy weren't coming back from an injury, but I wouldn't downgrade him for re-injury risk here.
For sure, I agree.
Anything else at tight end?
No, that's it.
On defense, $2,700 Broncos on DK versus Colt McCoy looks pretty good for cash. Also $3,700 on FanDuel for that defense. Tops our dollars per point on both sites. The ownership projection's even higher on FanDuel than it is on DraftKings for the Broncos, though 20%. I don't think there's any defense I would play at that kind of ownership projection.
Yeah, I think they're a good fit. Yeah, I think they're a good fade in tournaments for sure. I will be playing Denver in cash on both sides. Cardinals have the lowest implied total on the main slate at 17 points. Backup quarterback O-line is horrible, so good spot for Denver. GPP side, it's funny. On my non-Herbert teams, I think I'm going to play some Titans defense. Just we want our defenses facing dropbacks, right? Sack opportunities, interception opportunities, and the Chargers should lead the league in dropbacks this week. So I do think Tennessee at 2,200, minimum price is interesting for tournaments. And then both sides of this Steelers-Panthers game, just two good defenses, two bad offenses. I think there's upside to both. I actually like Carolina a bit better. I think, again, going back to the dropback thing, I think with Carolina going so run heavy, that limits the upside a little bit for the Steelers defense, unless they can, force Sam Darnold to have to drop back. But if I'm picking between the two, I actually slightly prefer the Panthers D.
Yeah, I can certainly understand that, especially against Mitchell Trubisky. I wish that I wonder if there's a way to bet against the Cardinals being the lowest scoring team this week, because I don't know. I don't see it. I think that there are so many options out there for fewest points this week. Maybe that's underrating Colt McCoy a little bit. I still like the matchup for the defense, but I wouldn't be shocked if the Cardinals reach 20 points this week.
I'm sure if you did enough digging on these sports books, you could find a place. I know they usually do like who will be the highest scoring team on the week. I don't know if they do lower. And you could bet the over on the team total for the Cardinals if you want.
Maybe I'll just go do that. I have to look more into that after this. I also like the $2,800 Patriots on DraftKings versus the Raiders. They're coming off a 20-point effort against the Cardinals on Monday night. 3 games of 17 plus DraftKings points among their past 4. They're also down $400 in salary versus last week, probably because the Monday game was too late for it to count in the algorithm for this week's pricing. Much more expensive on FanDuel, so they're not really as much in for me there. Still okay for tourney use if it fits, but also just $100 cheaper in salary than the Eagles. So at that point, I'm going to go ahead and play the Eagles over the Patriots. On FanDuel, I like $3,800 Lions against Zach Wilson.
Oh yeah, I didn't have the Lions on my list because I hadn't updated this for the Zach Wilson news. So yeah, Lions definitely in play. What are they on DraftKings? I'm sure
I
they're
didn't even check
cheap-ish.
that.
3,000 on DraftKings, which I kind of like. They won't be super chalk at that price, so I like them for tournaments. Last one I have is going to the other side of that Cardinals Broncos game and playing the Cardinals defense, especially on FanDuel at $4,400. I think that's a reasonable price. I think they have similar upside to the Broncos defense in that game.
I can agree with that as well. And that's going to do it for this week 15 DFS podcast. You can head over to draftsharks.com now, play around with the lineup generator, build your own lineups for playing on DraftKings, FanDuel, and Yahoo this week. You can also find articles from Jared and Kevin highlighting top picks for cash and tournament entries on both sites this weekend. I ran out of time for my Showdown Tips article this Thursday, but I will have those posted for Sunday night and Monday night games this week as usual. And, as we said at the top, we're going to be right back here in about 20 minutes to talk some drafting. We're going to actually do some drafting on both Underdog and Sleeper. So check it out there. And then, you can give the drafting a try yourself. For Jared Small and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schaff saying thanks so much for swimming with us.